how many day streak do you currently have in your Duolingo app?
Okay, this is a good day to ask because I just hit my 1,600 day streaks. We have users that now have 7-year streaks. So I joined in 2016. Duolingo basically had no revenue. My first project was to figure out how we can integrate ads to Duolingo. And I would say the hardest part about ads at first was convincing the company itself that ads would be a good thing. So that was our first entry into monetization. We're not a video game. We are not your typical education app. We're somewhere in between. We're kind of in our unique definition of an app. If we can't make a learning experience engaging, we're always going to lose. But no one learns a language by reading a book because it's boring as.
Hey, this is Carlos's AI voice clone. He is the CEO of Product School and the host of the Product Podcast. He asked me to introduce today's guest. Cem Kansu is the Vice President of Product at Duolingo, the world's leading language learning platform. Duolingo has grown tremendously in the last few years. It started as a free translation app in 2011 and is now a public company valued at over $15 billion, with annual revenues exceeding $700 million. The product offers courses in 43 languages, has over 113 million monthly active users, and has expanded into math and music education. Cem has been with Duolingo for 9 years, now leading all core product, growth, and monetization efforts. In this episode, we'll discuss Duolingo's product and market expansion strategy, ways to introduce gamification to drive engagement, key leading indicators to increase monetization while staying true to its mission of free education, how to run concurrent experiments at scale, and the role of voice AI in personalizing the learning experience. I was particularly impressed by Cem's insights on making self-taught learning fun and how Duolingo has managed to compete for user attention against social media and video games. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the show, Cem.
Thanks for having me, Carlos.
I have to ask, how many day streak do you currently have in your Duolingo app?
Okay, this is a good day to ask because I just hit my 1,600 day streaks. So like 1,600 days. It's huge for me.
I mean, you must be in the top leaderboard at the worldwide, or not?
I mean, worldwide, I wish, because we have users that now have 7-year streaks. Mine is only four-ish years. So I wish, but no, we have much more dedicated users than me.
That's incredible. So let's talk about Duolingo. You joined the company 9 years ago. It's been extremely successful. So I would love to learn a little bit more about what's the latest and greatest, what's the status of the company today, and what's been its evolution since you joined.
Sure. So yes, I've been here since 2016 now. And I worked on, for my first 5.5 years of my time here, I worked on monetization. Monetization for us included ads, in-app purchases, and subscriptions, which is also a little bit of a funny story because if you listen to Duolingo's launch talks, where our CEO, Luis, is talking about what Duolingo is, what it will be, he has statements. He used to say these statements where he would say Duolingo will never have ads, never in-app purchases, and never subscriptions. And those are the 3 things I did in that exact order. And I think Duolingo, and the reason he was saying those was, I think, the understanding that we obviously wanted to stand for access to education, but monetization might get in the way of that. So his view initially was no monetization, at least monetizing our user base. My job, at least for the 5 years of my tenure, had been figuring out how to stay true to our mission, but also find a business model that works. So anyway, we ended up building our freemium business model where all of our content is free, but then the added bells and whistles are part of our monetized features. And then for the past 3 years, I've been head of product. So I lead the product management team. And you also asked about what is the status of the company, what's going on. Let me also try to answer that fairly quickly. Obviously, we are known as the language app. So we teach more than 40 languages, but we've also started teaching math and music. So that's been one of the latest evolutions of the company, where we're not just a language app anymore. We teach math and music. We also have a English proficiency test called the Duolingo English test. So we're now operating across multiple businesses and multiple. We're trying to solve multiple product problems at the same time. A big focus for us is also for languages, one of the things we've been trying to solve for years, and we're putting a lot more effort now as well, is teaching you speaking. And with generative AI becoming a part of our tool set, we recently launched an experience we're calling Video Call, where you can practice, let's say you're learning Spanish that is tailored to your level, and you can converse with one of our characters. Her name is Lily. So you can converse with Lily and practice your Spanish where she tailors her Spanish to your level. It's been game-changing for how we teach conversation skills. So we're investing a lot there. That's part of our new subscription called Duolingo Max. That's one of our big bets. On top of that, the Duolingo obviously always invests in making learning fun. So there's a lot happening within that umbrella. Our leaderboards, our social mechanics, our streak mechanic, all of these continue to get better. So we're investing a lot in just making learning fun, which has been something we've been doing for ever since Duolingo started, but certainly a big focus today as well. And I'll pause there. The company's doing a lot more stuff, but I'll start with like 3 big things.
That's great. And my hope is that we can unpack each of those 3 during our conversation. I have a few more stats here. So your company started in 2011 as a translation app. And then it went public in 2021. Currently has a valuation, a market cap of over $15 billion. And it reported revenues in 2013 for over $500 million. Does that sound accurate?
That mostly sounds accurate. I'll correct course on one thing you said, which is Duolingo started as still an education product. So it wasn't, because when you say translation product, people assume, it was like Google Translate. Actually, Duolingo was still teaching languages. However, the monetization model at the time was based on translation. So it was a pretty clever, actually, model that I wasn't at the company at the time, but our co-founder, Luis, had built, which is as you answered questions on Duolingo. So let's say you're learning Spanish, you would translate, there's a lot of translation exercises. So you would translate a sentence from English to Spanish. If you do that at scale, so you have thousands of users doing translation exercises, Duolingo would crowdsource that and actually use that as a translation service. So for example, a website like CNN could buy a translation service from Duolingo, and then we would feed sentence by sentence that article to our users. They would do them exercises, and then you would crowdsource the right translation and then sell it as a translation service. That was the original monetization model. Even though the website was purely education focused, just like it is now, the monetization was translation focused. This had many problems, which I can get into, but the main one being translation is a bit of a race to the bottom business. And the moment your entire revenue comes from translation, you do start becoming a translation company, not an education company. So Duolingo quickly steered off of that business model early on. So anyway, that's the origination story that I just wanted to elaborate on.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think let's talk about the mission of your company, because I think it's closely connected to the way you go about building product and structuring your team.
That's true. So Duolingo's mission is to provide access to education. So we stand for basically creating the best educational product to teach languages, math, and music, and making sure that anyone who pays us a cent, that is mostly our subscribers that choose to pay us, and people who choose to pay us nothing, get the exact same educational experience. You can learn the same amount of French, whether you are a subscriber or you are a free user. Obviously, there's experiential differences. You might see ads if you are a free user, and you don't get all the bells and whistles that a subscription might get you, but you're still learning the same amount of French. You're never locked out of the app if you are not paying for Super Duolingo. And that's been core to our story and our business model, and it's been true to our mission. One of the things that makes us really proud. So I'm from Turkey, and most of the world, like where I grew up in Turkey, is learning English. Learning English in the world unlocks very much like a better lifestyle for folks who end up learning English. You can generally get a better job that pays you a better salary. You can go to a better school. Like in most jobs in most countries, learning English unlocks a better lifestyle, a better opportunities. And we wanted Duolingo to be accessible to anyone who might not have the means to pay. So that's been Duolingo's mission. And I guess our business model evolved to fit our mission.
Let's break down that, because I heard you talk about core components. So the monetization aspect, but also the educational aspect. And I can imagine that in between, you are also measuring the engagement to ensure that people are actually improving their language skills. So when it comes down to your product strategy, like how do you break down those components?
Yeah, we have effectively, if you really boil down the three things we really care about, one of them is obviously learning. And if you're spending an hour on Duolingo, you should be learning the thing you came to Duolingo for. And I say that a little bit, it sounds obvious when said that way, but you could also imagine we could just build mostly entertainment. It could be you spend an hour, 57 minutes of that is really fun, but you do 3 minutes of learning. We never wanted Duolingo to be that way. We want if you're spending an hour, we want you to learn substantial language or substantial math or substantial music. We want our product to be having high learning efficacy. That's one. The second one is engagement. And the reality is, being able to teach a language with an app or with a tool is nothing new. You can learn a language by reading a book, but no one learns a language by reading a book because it's boring as so the core to success in self-taught learning is making it engaging. If we can't keep you on Duolingo, if you don't find it fun enough, and fun enough means we have to compete with how fun a game on your phone might be, or how fun Instagram might be, etc. So if we can't make it fun enough, you're going to drop off. If you drop off, then you're definitely not learning anything. So first pillar is learning. Second pillar is engagement. Duolingo has to be fun. And this is mainly because self-taught learning, if you can't make it engaging, the users drop off. They don't stick around. And when they don't stick around, they don't learn anything. So, and then the third one is monetization. Obviously, to scale a business, you need revenue. And I think monetization for us, and we already talked about it a little bit, has been, can we find a way that fits into our other two pillars? So any learner should be able to learn and learn without paying us anything. The product has to be fun. We should never obviously take away from that. But also, we need revenue to sustain, grow the business and grow our products. So I think those are the three things that we think about when we run the business.
So as you think about the specific success metrics to ensure that those three core elements are working, what are those?
Great question. So let me start with the easy ones and land on the hard one, which is learning. Monetization, easy. You look at revenue. Businesses have figured out how to look at revenue already. It's the amount of dollars that come into the business, right? And for us, revenue includes three parts. For the most part, it is subscriptions. So more than 80% of our revenue is subscriptions. We also have ads and in-app purchases. The second one is engagement. We are a daily active user business because a lot of Duolingo users use Duolingo daily. This is also not by accident. It's also because learning a language requires daily practice. And connected to that, we've built a lot of mechanics that encourage daily usage, like the daily streak. So we measure most of our engagement retention. Obviously, we have a lot of sub-metrics, but if you really boil it down, it's daily active users. You want that to go up over time, not down. And then the third one is learning. Learning is much harder to define a single metric and say, yes, if this metric goes up, learning has gone up, because it's quite complicated to measure with a single metric, as you can imagine. But we use proxies. So obviously one of them is time. So we have a metric that we use as a proxy that we call time spent learning well. And it's basically a bit of a composite metric where we sum up all the time spent doing activities on Duolingo, and then we assign a multiplier to those activities on how valuable we think they are to learning. And then we get a score that says, okay, the users are scoring this much. And we use that for A/B testing, for example. So we test a change that maybe makes it more exciting to do lessons. And then we test if actually this metric goes up or down. That's one. Another thing we do is external studies. So to measure learning, so let's say we want to test the impact of teaching past tense before we teach future tense. I'm making up a potential change. Let's say you wanted to test what happens to learning. This is quite a bit of a long-term change. In an A/B test, you can't really see much difference. You wouldn't see much metric movement, but we do run external studies where we have kind of users go through the course for 3 months, and then we have them take proficiency tests throughout this 3 months to see if the outcome is statistically different in the span of like 3-4 months of learning. So learning is a little harder to measure, but it's obviously so important that like either we use some of these metrics and proxies to measure it, or we use our best judgment whenever we cannot.
I was kicking out on this year in review announcement that you made, similar to other apps, right? Like Spotify and so on. And it was funny to see like the specific metrics you were using for the users, right? Like the minutes spent learning, the new words learned, where you rank among all learners, the longest streak. I think those are good incentives for especially competitive people, right? To stay engaged and want to continue leveling up.
Yes. I mean, we have learned over time that a few metrics on Duolingo are really powerful in getting our learners excited. Streak by far is today the strongest one. So even you asked me like what my streak is. When people think about Duolingo, people think about the streak immediately. That has become almost a part of people's identities. People now throw, I don't know if you knew this actually. So, it's common for people to throw birthday parties. But now people also throw Duolingo streak parties when you hit a 365-day streak, or it's multiples. You throw a streak party and you get a cake that says 365 on it. So there's like TikTok videos of these Duolingo streak parties. It's really become part of people's identities because it shows two things, right? It really shows commitment, which is impressive. Like there are very minimal amount of things in life where you can say, I've done this every day consistently for, a whole year. So it shows commitment. I think that gives you pride. That feels good. The other one is it shows progress. Like probably in 1 year, even though if you might have done 3 minutes of Duolingo every day, which is not a lot by itself, but in a whole year, it starts adding up. So you probably made a good amount of progress in your Spanish. So anyway, streak is a really powerful metric we use. Another one is XP. XP is very much correlated with your leaderboard ranking. The more XP you gain, the higher you get up on the leaderboard. Those we found to be really motivating. Those are the most powerful ones. In the year in review, we also started using how many minutes you learned. I think that's also intuitive to think about. The 3-minute metric I was thinking about. A lot of people, when they first start Duolingo, they're like, well, I'm not sure if I'm learning anything. I only do like 2 minutes a day. But then if you stick to it, you add it up and it's like, okay, you've actually now spent 30 hours. 30 hours might be what you would have done in a semester in college anyway. So like it really starts adding up. So anyway, minutes learned is something we've started surfacing more. I think those are the famous ones. I mean, the obvious caveat is streak trumps most of our metrics today. It's what people talk a lot about. We have one new one we're introducing, by the way. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's called the Duolingo Score, which is on your homepage. It's available for certain languages, but we're rolling it out to every language. It's a measure of your progress. So it could be from 0 to 160, and we attach it next to the flag of the language you're learning. So I'm currently a 59 in Spanish, which I'm pretty proud of. It's like a lot of progress. So anyway, that's another metric that we're using, which is a little bit different than the other ones. It's a little closer to more of a pure learning metric, rather than other ones are more around gamification and the game mechanics of Duolingo.
Well, I'm from Spain, Cem, so I'm going to test that score in the future and maybe have you back for a
Sounds
interview in
good.
Spanish. As you were talking about the score, I started thinking about how some apps that are focused also on the health space were helping users get a lower price on their health insurance. So as an international person living in the US, I remember I had to pass an English test to prove my English proficiency when I came here to study. How are you thinking about also making that more official so it can be leveraged for other purposes outside your app?
So we actually have a product called the Duolingo English Test, which is geared towards university admissions offices to use as an official certification for deciding if the English proficiency of the candidates that they're getting is good enough for their purposes. So it's been out. So this is a product that's been out for a while, and it's actually accepted by majority of U.S. universities in the U.K., Canada, Australia as well. It's a high stakes test. It takes you almost 45 minutes to complete. The one big benefit is, if you've taken some of these English standardized tests, it is still very old school. You go to a test center, you got to book that test center. Not all cities have these test centers. You got to travel to these test centers, etc. It's quite expensive to take the test, to get to the test. Anyway, we do it all online. It's all on your computer. It takes 40 minutes, and it's much cheaper than the alternatives. And you can apply to American universities with it. So that's been our what I guess to answer your question directly. That's been our answer to proper English certification. And it's been awesome, honestly. I've studied done grad school in the US, and I had to take these tests, and it was really painful. And with the Duolingo English test, we're making it much easier.
Yeah, same. I think I selectively forgot that part. You're bringing it back. Anyway, let's unpack the next thing, which is monetization. You mentioned that when you joined the company, your founder was more focused on just maintaining the pure aspect of the business, and you are now finding a way to combine the educational experience with also a business model. So talk to me more about this freemium model component.
Yeah, definitely. So that's also been very much part of my own story at Duolingo as well. So we talked about the translation business model a little bit. When we decided we needed to move away from that, the obvious question was, okay, like how should we build a business model? We went about it in a very testing heavy approach where there was a lot of. So I joined in 2016. Duolingo in 2016 basically had no revenue. My first project was to figure out how we can integrate ads to Duolingo, because ads was this fairly easy thing to try where you don't need to ask anyone to pay. A lot of apps have ads, so users are generally used to ads. So testing ads and seeing what the revenue uplift could be and what the user response would be. And both of those were actually fine. And I would say the hardest part about ads at first was convincing the company itself that ads would be a good thing. A lot of our employees were quite against ads at first. It was a convincing journey. I think we convinced ourselves by looking at the revenue data was good. Like you can make revenue with ads. It wasn't super complicated. And engagement data was good too. Like the way we did ads, there's many different ways to do it. The way we did ads was quite tasteful. So our engagement data was good, and our users didn't mind it very much. Obviously, ads is one of those things. No one asks you to have ads. But when they don't mind it, that's quite a win. So that was our first entry into monetization. So we had ads. Very quickly, ads creates demand for removing ads. So some of our users started writing to us saying, hey, I'll pay you guys. Can I just remove ads? And then we're like, well, actually, that's not a bad idea. So we put out a subscription that was basically removing ads. We also had a secondary feature, which was you could offline some of the Duolingo lessons, so you could use it on the plane, etc. And that was it. So that was our very first basic subscription. That also started performing really well. What we saw to something what we didn't expect was also we had a lot of user goodwill that was built over time. Since Duolingo was free, people were learning languages by fully without paying us a cent. We saw some users just buying the subscription because they're like, well, I was trying to donate to Duolingo because I got so much use out of it. So let me buy the subscription at least. So we got early on, we also got a lot of users that are just like, hey, I want to contribute to the product I love. That was our start of this story. And then we kept testing and building different things. So we started adding different subscription features, testing them. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. For example, the offline feature, we realized it actually wasn't that much valuable. So we ended up making it entirely free. Or we added new practice modes into the subscription. And over time, we tested our way into a better and better subscription product. We also improved how we talk about the subscription, what its branding is. It was called Duolingo Plus at first, and then we made it Super Duolingo. We changed its color palette. We basically played with every element of it. But as we kept doing that, we grew our subscription product. And now it's become, I guess, 80% of the company's revenue. And that's been the monetization journey. So we also, obviously, we have kind of three business lines, like I said: subscriptions, in-app purchases, and ads. The latest evolution of these three business lines has been a new subscription tier called Duolingo Max. And Duolingo Max comes with this feature I mentioned a little bit that we're super excited about. It's called Video Call with Lily. If you've kind of interacted with Lily in the app, she is the purple haired teenager character we have. She has a very distinct personality, but anyway, you can call her to do conversation practice, and that's also been very exciting to work on.
Which is an AI avatar, right?
Correct.
So basically, you have multiple subscription tiers, which in total represents around 80% of your business, and you also
Correct.
monetize through apps as well as in-app purchases.
Correct. So we have exactly.
Okay, so what about the English test that you mentioned? Is that included as part of a subscription, or this is a separate add-on?
That's entirely separate. So when I say we have three business lines, I'm mainly talking about what is available in the Duolingo app. The Duolingo English test is a separate business, separate revenue, kind of separate as a product as well. So I'm counting that as entirely separate.
Okay. Well, I mean, you guys are over $500 million in annual revenue, which is incredible. You mentioned the word testing multiple times. So I'm very curious to know how you've been applying testing methodologies to different pricing strategies.
Yeah, we A/B test all of the stuff I'm mentioning. So when I say, we have added a new feature, we've changed the look of this page, you can easily assume all of these are A/B tests that were ran. We looked at the results and we decided they were good or not. Very early on, Duolingo realized the way Duolingo grew would be through product-led growth. And to do product-led growth at scale, you have to run A/B tests. Because that's the ultimate way you learn and iterate. Because if you have a growing user base, one of your big advantages is you have a hypothesis. Instead of debating that hypothesis for days, you go test it. You say, okay, what if this button was red instead of green? Would users click on it more? You can debate it all day, but the much better version is you test it. So it turns out red is better. So now you've learned that red does better. And then you go and say, well, is this shade of red actually the best color for this? So you go test different shades of red, and then you learn what shades of red work. This is a very obviously super simplified example. Actual learnings end up being a lot more substantial than this. For example, you learn if you present the streak in certain ways versus if you present it on lesson end, does it perform better? Or if you present it on the homepage, does it perform better? So you can test all these hypotheses. Anyway, we A/B test a lot. Concurrently, we test more than 300 A/B tests. So if you and I pull up our apps together side by side, very likely there's 300 variables that are going to be different on our apps. So it's a high volume of A/B testing on a product that where most people, when they look at Duolingo, they're like, so it looks very simple, right? But there's a lot of complexity that Duolingo has to deliver you lessons. People are shocked by the fact that there's so much people working on this app and so much experimentation happening on it. But that's just reality. So we innovate and test a lot of concepts. We talked about metrics, and one of the beauty of A/B testing is it gives you exact metric answers. So we test a thing, we realize it's good for retention or it's not, and then we learn, we kill, we launch, and then we move on. And that's been our product development philosophy for quite some time now.
So I want to continue digging here because I think it's fascinating. I don't know if there's any company that has more concurrent A/B tests. How do you go about doing that from a team staffing perspective as well as from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, so let me start with the technology side. We've decided to early on invest heavily into building our own analytics tools and our own A/B testing tools because early on we were using third-party tools, but we realized to run at the scale we do and do the customization that we need because we have a lot of custom metrics, we have our own needs. We've built a team that builds these tools and improves these tools over time. So technology-wise, we use basically everything that is built and improved in-house. From an operation standpoint, so our product teams are what you would imagine in most tech products. We have squads that have PMs, engineers, designers. And we have other folks as well, but at its core, you'll find these three functions. But in most product teams, you'll also find like data scientists or product marketers. But in general, everyone who works on a product team will be very well versed and very well trained in both how A/B testing works, what A/B testing is, and analytics and what metrics mean. So if you walk into a product team tomorrow morning and say, I think our free trial, so in this experiment we ran, our free trial starts are up 5% stat sig. Everybody on that team knows exactly what you're talking about, what it means, and why that happened. And if you send them for example, if you say to me this, and I say, well, I want to dig into it more, you send me an experiment report link. Everybody in this team knows how to read that report. So we've kind of made data and A/B testing democratized by making it easy to run, easy to read, and basically training our folks so that there's a very shared understanding and a shared language of metrics. When it comes to product management, I think this is something we take a lot of pride in, where I would say all of our PMs are like experts in kind of understanding data, interpreting data, and knowing how A/B tests impact our data.
So from a team org design, like how do you structure your entire team? Is experimentation a dedicated function, or is this kind of a core skill that you expect every single PM to have and bring to the table?
It's a core skill that we want everyone to have. I think, even in our interviews, we have like an analytics interview, for example. So we want folks to know at least a baseline level, but we have a lot of also trainings internally when someone joins Duolingo, they can get up to speed. And I think it's not only just about like knowing statistics and reading a report. I think the key skill that we also want like product managers to be really good at is interpreting data and making sense of it for business or user behavior. So if you say a metric is going up, good. But I think really understanding why that's going up and what change we made that made our users act differently to drive that metric up. I think connecting all these dots is a skill that just takes a bit of time to learn. But anyway, we want our PMs to be experts on all of these things.
So you mentioned A/B testing, and I can imagine there are other ways to experiment. And if you're running so many experiments at the same time, like how do you ensure that they don't cannibalize each other the same way you ensure that when something is going up and to the right, that's the right experiment, and that's not because the other things are kind of changing at the same time?
Yeah, I love this question. And to be frank, sometimes we mess it up and there's a clash and then it takes time for us to figure it out. But most of the time, we run independent tests that are fully randomized. So unless you're touching the same part of the real estate of the app. So for example, if you're running in change to move the button from top to bottom, I'm simplifying these examples, and I'm running a change to change the color of the button, those will clash. So if we're kind of running experiments on the same real estate, we make sure that they don't run at the same time. There will be an experiment clash and both of our data will be polluted. But as long as there's no clash in the experience itself, all of our tests can run and do run fully independent and fully randomized. So as long as there's no experiment interaction, the data tends to be very clean. If there's an interaction, we do one of two things. Either we wait until running the next experiment on the same page because it's just a clash will be a problem, or we segment our user base sometimes to say, okay, half of our users will see this experiment, the other half will see this experiment, but they will be mutually exclusive. There won't be overlap between the two user cohorts. But that's I would say a rare instance. Most of the time, we try to avoid these like super complex setups, and we if there's going to be a clash, we try to kind of prioritize and run accordingly. But if we need to move faster on a specific project, we sometimes run fully mutually exclusive user cohorts.
You mentioned that PLG is your main go-to-market motion. So in that setup, how accountable is the product team for revenue?
Very. Meaning there's different owners for different metrics. We have a monetization area where multiple monetization teams work in. The PMs in the monetization area very much are trusted and are owners of monetization related metrics. Same thing applies to growth. We have a lot of PMs that work on growth. So PMs that are responsible for the retention metrics, PMs that are responsible for social, PMs that are responsible for time, etc. But there's clear owners for product managers on what metrics they own. And yeah, if a metrics drops, you would easily know which PM to ask why it's dropping.
I
Or if
love
it,
that so
there's also,
much.
I always talk about fire drills. If it's going up, we also know who to thank. So that's how it works.
Well, a little bit of a sideline here, but as a user, I noticed that you also created some widgets outside the app, right? So on my iPhone, I can get those widgets, and I found that to be very, very smart because it's a way to delight me. Sometimes I'm not using your app, but I kind of get a surprise. Like, how do you go about finding those delightful moments that are not just about purely learning?
Yeah, the widget has been one of our most fun creations, I would say. We've had a lot of fun with it because widgets and even term itself, I think most widgets thought about widgets as like it must have a high overload of utility and information. I think we went the other way where it's just like, can we just make something really delightful and it will just have one piece of information, which is your streak count. And similar to your response, that's what we've heard from our users as well. And we've kept making it more and more fun. You use the term delight. I think we use a slightly different term internally. We try to make it unhinged. So it like kind of breaks patterns, where both our widget takes it one step further, but our app design as well, where we try to do things that you wouldn't always expect an app to do. And I think that's been great for one thing, which is quite unique to Duolingo, which is we have to remind folks to do their lesson. Doing your lesson at the end and the day is a little bit like someone reminding to eat your vegetables. It's again, like we try to make it as fun as possible, but a lesson might require some cognitive load. It's a little harder than just scrolling on Instagram. So we have to find creative ways and fun ways to remind you. We do push notifications, we do widgets, and when we do widgets or push, we try to be as creative as possible with it. And the Duolingo internal term for that has been make it unhinged. So it's now part of our product development philosophy to try to make things unhinged. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end we're in the habit building business, and I think widget has been trying to serve that exact goal.
And it takes me to the next theme that I wanted to explore with you, which is the design aspect of it. Like your app feels like a video game in many ways, right? So how do you go about taking inspiration from video games and other ways to create patterns that are not very common for other types of apps?
I think we do a few things. So we acknowledge that we have a little bit of an identity crisis ourselves, which is we're not a video game. We are not your typical education app, and we don't see ourselves as a typical education app. So what are we? We're somewhere in between. We're kind of in our unique definition of an app. But that being said, the way our top goal is always make things engaging, because if we can't make a learning experience engaging, we're always going to lose. So that being the top goal, we do get a lot of inspiration from games, but what games do tend to not exactly be fitting into Duolingo. So we get inspiration and we figure out how we can fit it in the concept of learning. But there's the reason we have now quests, we have leaderboards, we have lives, we have streak. All of these, we have a shop where you can buy items. All of these are commonly found elements in games, but then the version that Duolingo has is not exactly what you find in a game, but it's like some version of it that, has been adapted and fit into the concept of Duolingo. So that's one. So we get a lot of inspiration from games. I think the other term you used is delight, and delight is a super important part of our product building philosophy. So part of making things fun, and games do this very well, and we're also trying to do a great job at this, is making sure like every interaction you have feels really good. So if you tap a button, there's a really delightful haptic that you get. There's a good sound effect that you hear when you get an exercise right. The animation that like makes do a jump from right to left is like really fun. So we really sweat every tiny detail of the user experience, and sound, animation, haptics, illustration, the UI elements. We go pixel by pixel and make sure it's like really delightful. And that's just I think how we think about product, because our belief is that we have to use every opportunity we have to make every second you spend on Duolingo as delightful, as fun as possible, because otherwise the learning is always going to be cognitively taxing. So we need to reduce that tax by making things really fun.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of something else. I noticed that your app, my iPhone, changes sometimes. And that is not something I've seen in any other apps. I think it's very smart to also play with the native features that some of these platforms can offer beyond your own app.
100%. I think we talked about experimentation, where we experiment a lot. So the app changes quite frequently. We also get a lot of feedback on, this is sometimes positive, sometimes negative, to be clear, but like every time I log on to Duolingo, it feels like a different app. It really evolves and changes because we're adding new functionality, testing new stuff. But I think that's part of our philosophy. And we do want to be kind of fast moving and changing the product and testing completely new experiences. So yes, that's very intentional in a way.
But let's talk about this thing called artificial intelligence. And specifically, like, how are you leveraging this technology now to also customize those learning paths and making the learning experience more fun?
We're doing, I would say, two big things. One of them is building, we talked about this a little bit, but building interactive features that use generative AI for you to practice conversation. The exact feature that I'm talking about is video call, but generative AI has unlocked this massive, smart use case where every past attempt we made at doing this would be basically a dumb chatbot, where like everyone remembers those dumb chatbots. Like you would write something, it'd give you a canned response. That was kind of the best thing that was mainly coming up whenever we tried it. But with generative AI and GPTs, it's just been much more powerful, much smarter. So we're now building a lot of product experience on top of Gen AI and LLMs. So that's one. So interactive features to help you with conversation. The second one for us has been content creation. So it used to be the case when we first started, Duolingo's entire course, so let's say the English to Spanish course or any course, was fully handwritten. I mean, not on paper, but like it was written by humans, and every exercise, every word, every answer. Now we're moving a lot of that content creation to be AI based, because generative AI is quite good actually at giving you language tailored content. So for example, if you say, I would like to have beginners, obviously we built a lot of tooling and a lot of prompting. However, at the end, like we can generate the first draft of a course fairly quickly using generative AI. That's been a big unlock. And I think the third one is customization. So if you are going through Duolingo and let's say you are making more mistakes on certain concepts, we end up tailoring what kind of questions you get at the end of a lesson or in your practice lessons. And we adapt it based on how you're doing. If you're doing really well, we give you harder exercises. If you're doing poorly, we give you easier exercises. So we adapt it based on what you're doing. That's been another big unlock, just customization or personalization of difficulty. And those are the three ways we're using, I would say, AI quite a bit. Another part where we want to use more, and I think we're going to be experimenting more, is less on inside the product, but more inside the organization. So can we use AI for various things inside the organization? This is more experimental. I can't claim we've done too much, but like we just had a discussion with product managers on what part of our jobs could actually be offloaded to AI. Anyway, next year, this is one area I do want to experiment more of, but I don't think I have anything concrete where we're like, oh, this is the process we've replaced just yet.
No, it's funny because a lot of the companies that I interview have the opposite answer. They found opportunities to optimize certain processes internally, and they still haven't launched anything really impactful for their customers, while you describe 3 very specific use cases for customers. In fact, I think for that video called product, I read somewhere that it was 6 years in the making.
Yeah, it's been a long journey because we actually started with doing this exact thing with real humans. And that was 6 years ago when we first tried it. And then we tried many versions of that, but that has many problems. One of them is humans are expensive. That's problem number one. Quality is not consistent. That's problem number two. Anyway, we tried basically a subscription where you could call a human on demand, like calling an Uber, and you could practice Spanish with a human. Anyway, that didn't work very well, but then that took us a few years to build, experiment, and realize it was really complicated. And then we pivoted that to a texting product. So instead of video chat, you would do texting. Texting was just not very engaging. And then maybe now 2.5 years ago, we turned this similar experience and made it AI based. So it's now been, I guess, 5 to 6 years.
Well, let's talk about the future. I heard you talk about music and math as new avenues for your product. How did you pick those?
How do we pick math and music? For very different reasons, actually, for each of these subjects, but they launched at the same time on Duolingo. Let me start with music. So music actually is very similar to language in the sense that if you go around and ask the general population, would you like to be better at music? The general answer is yes. So it's kind of like language is very similar. If you like, most humans in the world have some desire to get better at some language. And this language differs, etc. And for music, the instrument people think about differs and their music skill is different. But generally, there's general desire to increase your proficiency in the topic. However, it's quite hard and costly and takes a lot of time to get better at music and get better at language. So the thesis for adding music was we can create this demand and capture this demand that exists and you do it the Duolingo way. Kind of do what we did to language, but do it for music. Math was a little different. Learning math is quite similar to how I describe learning English, where if you do know math, your life opportunities get better almost immediately. You can get better jobs, or you if you learn math, now you can learn physics. If you learn physics, you can learn engineering. There's all these things that unlock with math. But math today is, if you think about learning math, if you ask the general population, do you want to learn more math? The answer is like, I don't know, probably not. So it's not like a latent demand that exists, but we believe we can make math really fun and create that market. Because even though people say, I like math, do you want to learn more math? Not really is what people say. But then they do say, I wish I could calculate tips faster. I wish when I read like an article, I could make sense of the statistics better. So there's all these things that are connected to math, but people don't think of it as such. We believe we can make it really fun, Duolingo style, and create this kind of general population learning math product, which has been our product bet. So it's early days. We're seeing good traction, but we're investing a lot to make sure that we succeed on both math and music today.
Those sound like very big bets. So I'm always curious about how you balance tension, right, between those type of long-term impactful bets with these short-term win opportunities.
Yeah, I think for these topics like math and music, we treat them a little differently than how we think about our language business. It's less about doing quick A/B tests and maybe like, for example, if we're doing incremental tests on one screen on languages, we don't do that as much on math and music. We believe this requires a lot more like longer term feature building. So I think we think about it as quite a bit of different product building problem where we just have to find better product market fit. Versus it's not super different on languages, but there's a lot of growing the existing business work that we do that is quicker A/B testing. So it's a different product portfolio, and it is natural that math and music needs bigger and longer project timelines, bigger product bets to take the product to like step function improvements because it's in an early days. I think it's the difference between a later stage product and an early stage product. We certainly see math and music today as early stage.
But Cem, it's been a pleasure to have you here on the hot chair for almost an hour, dissecting all things product with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Carlos. The pleasure is all mine.